The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and laughter, the kind of laughter that made people feel important. At the center of it all stood Alara Vance, billionaire CEO of Vance Corp, glass of champagne in hand, surrounded by investors eager to be seen beside her. At the edge of the room, a janitor polished the marble floor, careful not to disturb the polished shoes and diamond heels that passed him. His name tag read, "Oh Hail." Someone joked about the market dip. Alara, always hungry for a performance, smirked. "Maybe we should ask him," she said, nodding toward the janitor. "He's been listening all night. What do you think, Hale? Should we buy more stock or sell before it burns?" The crowd chuckled. Phones came out. A few recorded, waiting for the punchline. Owen straightened slowly, mop in hand. His voice was calm, almost quiet, but it carried. "You already bought too much," he said. "And you didn't buy the stock, you bought your own reflection." The laughter faltered. Alara blinked. He continued, steady and unflinching. "Your company's been buying back shares to look stronger than it is. On paper it inflates value. In reality you're spending lifelines to polish glass." The CFO standing nearby stiffened. A few guests exchanged uneasy looks. Alara forced a smile. "That's quite an opinion for someone who mops floors." "Numbers don't care who reads them," Owen replied, "but they always tell on those who don't." Silence swallowed the laughter. Alara's smirk froze just long enough for the cameras to catch it. In a single sentence, the invisible man had turned the room upside down, and for the first time in years the most powerful woman in the city had nothing clever left to say. Morning sunlight poured through the glass walls of Vance Corp's headquarters, but it did nothing to warm the mood inside. The news cycle had already crowned the previous night's gala a public disaster. Every major outlet carried the same clip: billionaire CEO mocked by her own janitor. Alara Vance watched the footage from her penthouse office, a slow-motion replay of her smile cracking as the janitor's words echoed back at her. Beneath the footage, headlines scrolled like verdicts. "Vance Corp inflated buybacks or fraud. Janitor's warning sends market reeling." Her reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, pale, tired, cornered. The stock ticker at the bottom of her screen bled red, down 12% since market open. Investors were calling. Her PR chief was panicking. Her legal team demanded a statement, but the words from last night rang louder than all of them. "You bought your own reflection." She slammed the laptop shut. The sound echoed. Alara wasn't easily rattled. She'd inherited the company after clawing through boardroom politics in her father's shadow. But this, a janitor predicting an internal collapse with surgical precision, wasn't humiliation. It was impossible. She buzzed her assistant. "Find the maintenance roster. I want the janitor from last night. Owen Hale. Bring him up." Her CFO, Julian Cross, entered without knocking. He looked as if he hadn't slept either. "Market overreaction," he said briskly. "It'll pass." "Overreaction?" Alara snapped. He called the exact flaw, down to the share buyback cycle. Julian hesitated. Coincidence, maybe. Or someone feeding him information. The idea hung between them like a spark in dry air. Alara's eyes narrowed. "You think someone inside leaked internal reports?" "I think," Julian said carefully, "if that man knew anything real, it didn't come from a mop bucket." Her pride twisted into suspicion. Internal sabotage wasn't unthinkable, not in this climate. Rivals would kill for a way to destabilize her company before the next merger. But why use a janitor as the messenger? She rose from her chair. "If he's being used, I want to know by whom." Moments later, the elevator chimed. Owen Hale stepped out, wearing the same uniform from last night, his shoulders squared as if walking into judgment. He looked surprised to be standing on the top floor, but not afraid. Alara motioned to the chair opposite her desk. "Sit." He didn't. "If this is about what I said—" "It's exactly about what you said," she interrupted. "You made a spectacle of me in front of my board, my investors in half the city. So here's your chance to explain." "I wasn't trying to embarrass you," he said. "You asked a question. You gave an answer you shouldn't have known." He finally met her eyes. "Maybe you should have." The silence that followed was heavier than accusation. Alara studied him. Steady gaze, calm tone, no trace of the smugness she expected. There was something unnervingly precise about him, like a man who measured every word before letting it go. "How did you know?" she asked. "I read things," he said. "Your quarterly reports, market filings. The numbers don't line up with your asset liquidity. That kind of pattern repeats only when buybacks are masking debt exposure." Alara's pulse spiked. He wasn't guessing, he was diagnosing. "You expect me to believe a janitor runs market analyses in his spare time?" He gave a small, almost apologetic shrug. Everyone needs a hobby. Julian cut in, his tone sharp. This man shouldn't have access to any internal document. I didn't say internal, Owen interrupted. Everything I said is public record. You just have to look close enough to see where the math stops making sense. Elara leaned back, studying him again, not as a nuisance but as a puzzle. Something about his poise unsettled her more than the crash itself. Let's say you're right, she said. Let's say there is a flaw, maybe even a leak. Why tell me in front of a room full of cameras? Owen's answer came without hesitation. Because that's the only place you'd listen. That stung, and worse. It felt true. Elara stood, turning toward the city skyline beyond her window. For years she'd commanded the market with pure willpower. She'd silenced critics, crushed rumors, driven every conversation. Yet now, one quiet man with a mop had spoken a single sentence that made the world question her empire. She turned back. You think you're clever, Mr. Hale?
I think I'm honest, he said.
Sometimes that looks the same. Her instinct told her to fire him. Her fear told her not to. Instead, she said, You've got 24 hours. Prove what you're suggesting, or you'll never work in this city again. Owen hesitated, then nodded once. Understood. As he left, Julian exhaled hard. You can't be serious. I'm very serious, Elara said, eyes fixed on the door. If he's wrong, he's finished. But if he's right, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The stock ticker on her wall had already said enough. Another red flash, another drop. For the first time in her career, Elara Vance wasn't fighting a rival. She was fighting a ghost with a name tag, and the terrifying possibility that he might be the only one telling her the truth. The next morning began without ceremony. The city still buzzed about the janitor who exposed a billionaire. Social feeds clipped the video with mock titles, Mop Guy versus Market Queen. Elara had stopped checking after the 10th headline. Her CFO begged her to issue a statement. Her PR manager pleaded for damage control, but Elara's instincts said something else. The truth wasn't the threat. The source of that truth was. So instead of calling her lawyers, she called her head of IT. Give temporary network clearance to an employee named Owen Hale, she said flatly. The man hesitated. Ma'am, he's maintenance. Then let's see how clean he can make our books. Owen arrived an hour later, still in uniform, still uncertain whether this was a promotion or an ambush. The top-floor conference room looked like another world. Glass table, silent walls, air that smelled too expensive. A company-issued tablet waited at the center, glowing with a single file. Acquisition ledger, level 3 access. Elara didn't bother with greetings. That's your sandbox. No external access, no removable drives. Anything you find stays in this room. He nodded once. Understood. She folded her arms, watching as he sat down and opened the file. He didn't scroll aimlessly like most executives did when they wanted to look competent. He went straight to the timestamps, the revision logs, metadata behind the numbers. The screen reflected in his eyes. Calm, precise, focused. Minutes passed in silence. Elara shifted impatiently. Finally he said, Your mergers don't add up. Her brows lifted. Meaning? He tapped a series of entries. 6 acquisitions over the last 18 months. 3 in renewable tech, 3 in logistics. Different industries, different boards, but every one of them wired to the same offshore intermediary, Sibblegate Holdings. On paper it's a vendor. In practice, it's a funnel. Elara frowned. Those were legal transactions. I'm not saying they weren't, Owen replied quietly. I'm saying they weren't real. He rotated the tablet toward her. Sablegate's registration number doesn't exist in the Cayman Business Registry. Whoever built your acquisition tree created phantom subsidiaries to justify outgoing capital, and the pattern's too clean for accident. She leaned closer, heart thudding. How much? 72 million in total transfers, he said. All disguised as consulting expenses, enough to fund a private acquisition against you. Julian, who had entered mid-sentence, nearly dropped his coffee. That's absurd. We have audits, oversight. Do you personally review the auditors? Owen asked, looking up. Julian hesitated. That's the accounting department's job. Exactly. Elara's pulse ticked faster. There was a cold precision to the janitor's logic, a methodical confidence that no ordinary maintenance worker should possess. Where did you learn to read ledgers like that? She asked. Owen didn't look up from the screen. Some things you pick up after enough mistakes. That's not an answer. He exhaled, leaned back slightly, and for the first time allowed a shadow of his past to surface. I used to teach finance, he said quietly, before someone made sure no university would hire him again. Alara blinked. You were a professor. Assistant professor, he corrected. One with too many questions about where donation money disappeared during a research partnership with a major corporation. His mouth tightened. They called it insubordination. I called it theft, Julian muttered. And now you mop floors. Owen's expression didn't flinch. Honest work doesn't scare me. Dishonest numbers do. For the first time, Alara felt something she hadn't in years, shame. She turned to the window, trying to hide it. You think that's happening here? Theft? Owen paused, studying the patterns on the screen. I think someone's using your own ambition against you. The buybacks, the overvalued subsidiaries, it's all designed to make you chase the illusion of growth until you collapse under the weight of it. Alara swallowed hard. The logic fit too perfectly. She wanted to argue, to protect the image of control she'd built, but the quiet certainty in his voice dismantled every defense. What would you do? She asked finally. Owen didn't hesitate. Shut down the Sablegate pipeline, cross-audit all shell vendors, and check your board for anyone who signed off on those transfers after midnight hours. Alara blinked. Midnight hours? He rotated the screen again, showing timestamp logs. The approvals all occurred between 12 ARN and 2 ARN AM. Someone's exploiting remote authorization. That's how a sinner trades stay invisible. The time zone markers prove it. Julian stepped closer, jaw tight. That's impossible, Owen interrupted softly. Then you should be relieved when we prove me wrong. Alara could see Julian's discomfort like a crack in glass. His tone, his defensiveness, all of it fed her suspicion. She said nothing, just watched as Owen highlighted another irregularity, this time in employee compensation ledgers. Here, he said, tapping an entry. Quarterly bonuses paid to 5 inactive executives. 3 of them don't exist in the personnel database. The routing numbers link back to the same offshore branch. Her voice lowered. How long would it take you to map all of this? 48 hours if I don't sleep, he said. You'll have 24, she replied. He gave a small nod, not submission, just understanding. As he gathered the tablet and began to leave, Alara stopped him. One more thing. Why tell me this at all? You could have sold the information, or stayed quiet. He looked at her evenly. Because someone did that to me once. And silence cost me everything. Their eyes met, hers sharp with guarded pride, his steady with quiet defiance. For the first time she saw the man behind the uniform, someone who'd already lost what she feared losing most, credibility. After he left, Julian spoke first, his voice tight. You're not actually giving him access to our systems again, are you? Alara didn't answer. She turned the tablet over in her hands, watching the faint reflection of her face on the black screen, the reflection that looked more and more like guilt. Double the security logs, she said at last. Until legal, I want every offshore partner rechecked. Julian hesitated. You think he's right? She stared out the window at the falling stock ticker. I think he's dangerous, and right now that's exactly what I need. Down below, the city moved like nothing had changed. But inside Vance Corp's walls, a janitor had just been handed the keys to its secrets, and the empire had begun to tremble in silence. The following evening stretched long past midnight. The city outside the tower slept, but Owen Hale was still at the glass conference table, surrounded by quiet machines and the low hum of servers. Stacks of printed ledgers lay beside him like architectural blueprints, numbers upon numbers, tracing the veins of a company that pretended to be clean. He wasn't supposed to print anything, but the more he dug, the more he needed to see it all spread out, the way patterns told their own stories when given space to breathe. At 1:47 a.m. his cursor froze over an old acquisition file, marked Archive 2009 Legacy Trust. He almost skipped it until he saw a familiar name on the metadata tag, Vance Foundation Endowment Program. He clicked. A long list unfolded, grants, scholarships, academic donations, all dated before Alara Vance had become CEO. Halfway down the page, a single entry stopped him cold. Recipient, Hale, Owen T. Institution, Eastbrook University, Department of Economics, year 2009. Status revoked, financial irregularities. He sat back, the world narrowing around those words. It couldn't be coincidence. He scrolled further, saw the signature on the original approval line. Richard Vance. Alara's father, the late founder of Vance Corp, the man the media still called the last honest tycoon. Owen's throat tightened. He remembered the letter, the excitement of being chosen, The disbelief that someone like him, a janitor's son from nowhere, had earned a corporate scholarship. Then the scandal hit. An internal audit declared the fund mismanaged, the grant revoked, and his university reputation quietly dismantled. His career had died before it began. Now the source of that ruin sat in front of him, buried under a decade of digital dust. He stared at the screen for a long time, jaw clenched before closing the file. By morning, the air on the 81st floor was thick with tension. Alara strode in briskly, coffee untouched in her hand, the exhaustion beneath her perfection showing through. "Report," she said. Owen handed her a printed sheet, a concise summary of the false vendors and shell accounts he'd confirmed overnight. "Your company's bleeding money through fake subsidiaries that don't exist on paper," he said. "Someone's been setting up fronts that collapse into other fronts, all signed off under old board permissions." She scanned the sheet, her brow furrowing deeper with each line. "You said this started years ago?" "More than a decade. It began under your father's expansion trust." Her head snapped up. "That's not possible. My father kept every account transparent. He built this company's reputation on clean books." Owen hesitated. "Then someone used his name to hide it." She looked up sharply. "You sound like you knew him." There it was, the moment he'd been dreading. He could lie, pretend it was just data, just deduction. But he'd seen her father's signature last night. He couldn't unsee it. "I didn't know him," Owen said carefully. "But once, I thought I did." Her expression hardened. "Meaning?" He slid the tablet toward her. The document glowed faintly. "Vance Foundation Endowment Program 2009. She skimmed it, frown deepening, until she reached the bottom line. The name hit her like a thrown stone. "Recipient. Hale, Owen T." Her voice was barely a whisper. "That's you." He nodded once. "I don't understand." "Your father's foundation funded my graduate research," he said. "I was 25. My project focused on financial ethics in corporate philanthropy. 6 months later, the grant was revoked. I was accused of misreporting funds I never touched. The university terminated my post. No one would hire me again." Alara looked up from the screen, shock written across her face. That program was shut down because of a fraud audit." "Yes," he said quietly. "A fraud I was blamed for. It killed my career before it started." For a moment she looked as if she might deny it, reflexively defending her family name, but something in his expression stopped her. There was no bitterness, just the kind of calm that came after years of awfulness. She sank into her chair, eyes distant. "You think my father framed you?" "I think someone did. Maybe not him directly. But that file proves the foundation was already being manipulated back then. Whatever's happening to you now started with the same machinery." Silence stretched between them, the kind that rewires how two people see each other. Alara spoke first, her voice smaller than usual. "I grew up watching him work himself to death trying to make this company untouchable. After he died, I spent my life protecting his name. And now you're telling me that the rot began before I ever took the chair," Owen said softly. "It doesn't mean he knew. Corruption hides best behind good reputations." She stared at the glowing document, the reflection of her father's signature flickering over her eyes. For once there was no anger, no command, no armor, just grief and disbelief bleeding into quiet realization. Finally she looked at him. "All these years you've known who I was. Why didn't you ever tell me? Would you have listened?" Her lips parted. No words came. He continued, "I didn't want revenge. I wanted proof. And now, I think the same people who buried me are coming for you." The truth landed with a kind of terrible symmetry. Two people from opposite ends of the world, ruined by the same ghost. Alara leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. "So we're both cleaning up the same mess." "Different tools," Owen said. That drew the faintest smile from her, the first flicker of humanity he'd seen. "You're not what I thought you were," she said. He shrugged. "Neither are you." She rose, pacing the edge of the conference room, the city skyline flickering behind her. "If this link is real, it means someone's been building a network of false fronts since before my tenure. Someone who outlived my father's audit trail. That means a board member. Or someone with inherited access." Owen nodded. "I can trace who signed the original endowment revocation. That name might lead us to whoever's behind this." Alara turned to him. "Do it. Whatever you need." He hesitated. "That's a dangerous promise." "So is silence," she replied. "And I've been silent long enough." He studied her for a moment. The billionaire who'd mocked him 2 nights ago now looked more like a daughter staring at the ruins of her father's legacy. "Then we do this together," Owen said. Alara met his gaze and nodded once. Together. When he left the room, she lingered at the window. The reflection in the glass showed two faint figures, one in a tailored suit, one in a janitor's uniform, both blurred by morning light. For the first time she saw what her father must have seen. That truth didn't always come from the boardroom. Sometimes it came from the quietest man in the room, the one who'd lost everything to protect it. And beneath her pride, beneath the exhaustion, something else stirred, not just curiosity but trust, uneasy, fragile, and entirely new. By mid-morning, the glass conference room looked like a war bunker. Dozens of open files, cross-checked spreadsheets, and network flowcharts sprawled across the table in organized chaos. Alara Vance stood over them, arms crossed, eyes sharp but weary. Owen Hale sat opposite her, sleeves rolled, tracing digital trails like arteries feeding into a poisoned heart. He spoke without looking up. The leak isn't through your public reports anymore. It's internal. Someone's using encrypted file relays to feed data to a proxy server registered under Ardent Capital. Alara's pulse quickened at the name. Ardent. Her chief rival, the same conglomerate circling Vance Corp for months, waiting for a weakness to strike. Owen highlighted lines of data, thin as veins. Here, look at these transmission intervals. Once every 12 hours, precisely at 2 a.m., UTC. Whoever's sending it knows how to mask metadata. But they're sloppy about access points. They always log in from inside this building. Alara's jaw tightened. Show me. He tapped the screen. A map of the headquarters appeared, glowing with small blue markers where authorized logins occurred after midnight. Hundreds of entries blinked and vanished as he filtered. Only 3 remained. Executive-level access only, Owen said. The system recognizes the user ID tags. One belongs to you. The other 2. He hesitated. Say it. Julian Cross, he said quietly, and Cassandra Liu, your communications director. Alara's expression didn't move, but a tremor of disbelief cracked through her voice. Julian's been with me since before I took over. Cassandra's been running PR since my father's era. They're the only ones with access to both your secure investor memos and the marketing metadata used for public announcements. The leak uses both. It's how Ardent knows when you're vulnerable. Her knuckles pressed white against the table. You're telling me my 2 most trusted people might be selling me out? I'm telling you, Owen said carefully. The data says someone close to you is. The room fell silent except for the low hum of the servers. Alara turned to the window, the skyline glittering like static. Trust was her currency, and it had just devalued overnight. How much time until Ardent moves? She asked. Owen checked the timestamps again. Their next acquisition filing opens Friday evening. If they hit their target price before then, they'll have grounds for a hostile bid. 48 hours. Her breath caught. 48 hours to find a traitor. He nodded, or lose the company. By afternoon, Owen had built a wall of evidence, timestamps, message headers, mirrored caches. He wasn't just following the numbers anymore. He was chasing a ghost through firewalls and legal traps. Every discovery led deeper into a maze of secrecy that no janitor should have had the skill to navigate. And yet he moved like a man retracing his own mistakes. Alara watched from across the room. There was something unsettling about the way he worked. Not the speed, but the silence. He treated each line of code like confession. You do this like someone who's done it before, she said finally. I've spent 6 years cleaning after people who thought data could hide guilt, he said without looking up. It can't. Her voice softened. You're not cleaning floors anymore. He gave a faint smile. Same dirt, different tools. An hour later, he stopped cold. Found it. Alara leaned in. What am I looking at? A hidden directory masked under Cassandra Liu's press release backups. The code redirects attachments to a foreign IP address before routing them back to your PR cloud. 90% of her memos go to the correct server. 10% vanish into Ardent's inbox disguised as ad drafts. Alara's pulse hammered. You're sure? He magnified the logs. Same signature. Same interval. She stared at the screen. I can't believe this. Owen straightened slowly. You don't have to believe me. Believe the data. The words weren't cruel, just steady, but they carried a weight that made her throat tighten. Alara stepped back, pacing. If she's compromised, Julian had to know. He signs every budget she touches. There's no way this happened alone. Owen watched her, the Steel CEO unraveling inch by inch. He saw something he recognized, the face of someone realizing betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from people who've shared your table. He spoke quietly. We can't accuse anyone yet. Not without proof. If we move too early, they'll bury the trail. Her voice dropped low. Then how do we smoke them out? That night, the plan took shape like a shadow forming from light. Owen's idea was simple but dangerous. If we plant a false acquisition report, something juicy enough to tempt a leak, we'll see who takes the bait. Alara considered it. A decoy. A trap, he said. We embed unique code markers into each copy. Cassandra gets version 1. Julian gets version 2. Both lead to fake mergers. Whoever sends it to Ardent exposes themselves by the marker they use. She exhaled slowly. You've done this before. Owen didn't answer. Her eyes narrowed. You said you were a professor. Professors don't set traps. He finally looked up. They do when they're trying to prove who framed them. The air between them grew heavier, a silent understanding that his past wasn't academic theory. It was survival. Alara gave a short nod. Do it. Frana. They worked through the night. Owen built the files, disguising each as a confidential strategic asset summary for upcoming mergers. The fake data looked perfect, numbers credible enough to tempt a rival's greed. He inserted invisible digital fingerprints, one-letter difference in metadata tags. By dawn, both files were sent, Cassandra's through PR, Julian's through finance. Now all they could do was wait. 20 hours later, Owen's monitor pinged. He froze, heart skipping. Got something. Alara rushed over. Which one? He zoomed in. The alert blinked on a trace route. An external IP from Zurich, Ardent Capital's legal office. The file name showed the metadata tag. Version 2. Alara's stomach sank. Julian. Her voice was a whisper. Half disbelief, half heartbreak. She sank into a chair, staring at the floor. He was my father's protege. He taught me how to read a balance sheet. Owen's voice was low. That's how traders hide behind people who'd never suspect them. She pressed a hand to her temple. He'll know we're onto him once the leak fails to deliver. Then we don't let it fail, Owen said. We feed it. Her eyes flicked up. Feed it? Make him believe his betrayal's working. If he thinks he's still winning, he'll stay predictable. We can track his next move. She hesitated, then nodded. We'll play him his own way. At 3:00 a.m., the office was quiet again. Only the city lights reflected in the glass. Alara sat by the window, watching the sleepless glow. Owen worked silently across the table, cross-checking servers, planting data mirrors, setting alerts. Finally she spoke, her voice softer than before. You could have left after proving the leak. Why stay? He didn't look up. Because once, someone didn't believe me until it was too late. I'm not letting that happen twice. She watched him for a long moment. The man she'd once dismissed, now holding the fate of her empire in his steady, calloused hands. Then she said quietly, 48 hours. He nodded. 48 hours. Outside, the city gleamed with artificial calm. Inside, two people from opposite worlds prepared to dismantle the web tightening around them before it closed for good. They called it a decoy because it needed to look like everything they feared, credible, public-facing and deliciously fatal if Ardent ever touched it. In practice, it would be a razor disguised as a ribbon of paper. Alara sat at the head of the table while Owen laid out the mechanics. She still wore the armor of a CEO, measured breaths, clipped words, but the lines around her mouth were rawer than usual. Pride had taught her the vocabulary of trust. Now that vocabulary was failing her, and she hated the taste of it. The bait has to be believable, Owen said. Not desperate, not sloppy. If it smells rushed, Ardent will ignore it. If it's too perfect, they'll suspect sabotage. He hit the exact middle, plausibility with an irresistible upside. He pushed a mock file across the table. The header read, K-Bridge Acquisition Confidential Strategic Asset Summary. The contents showed a small, struggling platform with proprietary routing tech that, if integrated, could accelerate Vanska Logistics' arm by a year. Numbers were conservative, projections conservative in the way of people who wanted to be believed. Alara scanned it, eyes narrowing on margins and footnotes. This reads like something we'd actually consider, she said. Good, dangerous enough to be attractive, but not so big it looks implausible. Exactly, Owen replied. Now, the engineering. We embed a unique metadata marker in every copy so we can trace any leakage downstream. Not just a fine line, a hidden checksum in the PDF and a false audit trail that only our system will recognize. When a copy leaves an authorized environment and appears in Ardent's logs, we'll know which version leaked and who carried it. Julian hovered nearby, face pale. He tried to laugh it off. We're really doing this. Planting false intel. Alara didn't answer him directly. She fixed her eyes on Owen. You're sure this won't backfire and make us look worse? Owen's voice was steady. Every forensic trace we need will be embedded. If Ardent moves, we'll know which vector they used. If Julian or Cassandra handed it off, the marker will show. This is how you catch a leak. Make it bite you. What about legal? Julian protested. We can't fabricate acquisition documents. We're not fabricating an intent to acquire, Alara said. We're creating a controlled simulation for internal vetting. Legally, it's an internal exercise. Ethically, it's deception. But so is spying. Her jaw tightened. We prefer the kind that saves the company. Julian's objections faded into the hum of the servers. He knew she was right, which only made the betrayal sharper. Owen pushed further. We also need to control the appearance of vulnerability. If Arden suspects the board is panicking, they'll accelerate. We want greed, not panic. Let them think they can make a clean exploit and profit. He tapped a line on the projected spreadsheet. Add a minor compliance footnote that looks like a regulatory wrinkle, something a finance team would miss in a rush. That's the hook. Greed beats caution every time. Alara allowed herself a sardonic smile. You make it sound like poetry. It's not poetry, Owen said. It's behavioral economics. They compartmentalized the plan. Owen would craft the files and build the metadata fingerprints. Julian would be the unwitting carrier, the one whose version of the memo would actually go through the finance channels. Cassandra would be seated with a different, PR-oriented summary. Each copy would be slightly different, each marked. Whoever fed Ardent would reveal themselves by the marker they transmitted. Why Julian? Alara asked aloud, partly to justify the pain of it. He's loyal. He's been with my family for years. Because the trail pointed to him, Owen answered. Because Ardent pulled the version we set for finance, not the one meant for PR. He has the access. He has the means. And he has motive. The same debts and pride that make men do desperate things. She felt the old anger flare at his words, then tamped it down. Strategy needed cold truth, not theatrics. There were practicalities that had to be addressed. Owen insisted on isolated terminals, read-only permissions and controlled distribution. They would not attach the decoy file to email the way they normally did. Instead, they would route it through a private approval queue that mimicked authentic workflows. That way, when someone authorized it, the action would be recorded as normal. If someone siphoned it, the siphon would leave fingerprints. Owen stayed late into the night building the mock acquisition, and the ghosts inside it. He created a chain of dummy vendors and fabricated testimonials from supposed boutique consultants. Each item looked correct, with proper letterheads and signature blocks. He buried the unique markers in places most people would never think to look. An extra space in a VAT code, a diagonal stroke in a scanned signature, an invisible character in the metadata. To the untrained eye, the document was exactly as dangerous as it needed to be. Alara wrestled with the moral cost. The plan required her to weaponize her own circle, to use trust as bait. Pride couldn't help but protest. She sat at her desk watching the city tilt into night through the floor-to-ceiling window, and felt suddenly small. We're setting a trap for someone who believed in me, she said softly.
Owen joined her.
Not with consolation but with a fact. People who sell out never stop seeing themselves as heroes. That's the vulnerability you exploit. Make them think they're saving themselves and they'll walk right through the minefield. She hated that it worked. The next morning, they staged the leak. Julian was given a sanitized finance memo that included the K-Bridge summary as a senior review attachment. He read it, frowned, and vaulted it through the internal approval process, exactly as he had done countless times with her endorsement pinned at the top. Cassandra received her own version via a PR draft flagged for executive note. Both files carried their separate invisible markers. Owen watched the logs with a calm so absolute it felt like confidence earned by pain. He and Alara sat in the secure monitoring room, each minute stretching into a negotiation between hope and dread. They were not equal yet, but the table had shifted. Alara had ceded some control. Owen had taken a disproportionate share of responsibility. Where she had once dismissed him, she now relied on him for the plan's mechanics. Once it's out, we don't pounce immediately, Owen said. We let Ardent take the bait. They'll try to monetize it. That's when we can can them, and the channel that fed them. Alara nodded. 48 hours. They sent the files. For a few long hours, nothing happened. Then, just before midnight, Owen's console pinged with a trail, a foreign IP, a routed handshake, then a shadow transfer. The marker in Julian's version blinked on the screen. Alara felt a hollow wash of betrayal and cold relief. Julian had taken the bait. He had walked through the door. You okay? She asked him the next morning, watching him move through the office, acting the part of the untroubled CFO. Julian's smile was thin. Of course. Why wouldn't I be? Ilara didn't answer. She studied his face, trying to find the moment when the ledger of his life had started to tilt toward enemies. Pride and fear sat together in her chest, contentious and quietly rearranging her sense of command. The trap had been set. Now the game began in earnest. They would let the mirror reflect their own image back at them, waiting to see which hand reached first to polish it. Night bled into another without ceremony. The city lights shimmered through the high windows like distant static, and the only sounds in the conference room were the low hum of servers and the click of keyboard keys. Ilara sat at one end of the table, hair tied back, sleeves rolled, her jacket discarded somewhere hours ago. Owen sat opposite, reading a new batch of audit trails. Both looked too tired to posture anymore. Look at this, Owen murmured, pointing to a column of numbers. The transfer requests from the K-Bridge shell. They came in pairs, one legitimate, one mirrored. Someone wrote a script to duplicate every payment into a separate shadow account, then wiped the trace right after the nightly sync. Ilara leaned closer. How did we miss this for months? You didn't, he said. You were never supposed to find it. Whoever's behind this knows your systems better than your own engineers. She folded her arms. You make it sound personal. It is, Owen said quietly. Corruption always is. His tone made her look up. For once there was something raw in his voice, something that sounded more like memory than theory. You've seen this before, she said. He hesitated, then nodded. The university where I worked, same kind of pattern. Donations moved through clean channels, skimmed just low enough to stay invisible. I reported it, thinking the system would correct itself. Instead, they called it a procedural error and made me the scapegoat. The dean who signed off retired rich. He went silent for a long moment, staring at the code as if it were the same wound written in new numbers. Ilara spoke softly. That's when you lost your position. Lost my name, he said. My papers were pulled, my recommendations erased, every application flagged. 1 week I was teaching future analysts. The next I was scrubbing floors in the same building. She studied him, not the janitor, not even the analyst, but the man who had learned the price of truth the hard way. And you still kept watching numbers? They were the only thing that didn't lie to me. The room fell quiet again, heavy with the kind of silence that builds trust by accident.
After a while, Ilara said,
My father used to say that truth is the only currency that never inflates. I used to believe that. Then I became CEO. He looked at her, waiting. I've spent 5 years pretending I was protecting his legacy, she continued. But really I've been protecting my pride. The fear of being the one who ruins what he built keeps me mean, even when I know the rot's already inside. Owen leaned back. You're not your father. I know, she said bitterly. That's what scares me. He gave a small, almost kind smile. Good. Fear means you still care. She laughed softly. The sound surprised even her. You're not great at comfort, you know. Not my department. For a while they just worked. The monitors reflected their faces side by side, both caught in the pale blue glow. Two people who'd built their lives on opposite sides of glass walls, now forced to share the same view. Owen broke the silence first. You ever think about walking away? Every week, she said. Then I remember what it cost to get here. And I'm not sure if I'm still climbing for success or running from failure. He looked at her for a long moment. Maybe both. Their eyes met, steady this time. Not rivalry, not distance, just the recognition of exhaustion that comes from fighting invisible enemies too long. Ilara turned back to the data. So, what's next? Owen pulled up the trace of Ardent's digital movements. They're biting harder. The proxy accounts that used to pull every 12 hours are now active every 6. That means our mole's getting greedy. They think the merger leak is working. Then we hold them steady, she said. Exactly. Let them take more rope. When he said it, she noticed his hands steady, precise. Not the hands of someone new to pressure. You really could have been anything, she said quietly. Analyst, professor, investigator. I was, he replied simply. For a while. She smiled faintly. You still are. He looked up, surprised. The compliment wasn't casual. It came from a woman who didn't give them freely. She noticed the flicker of gratitude in his eyes and added, half teasing, just don't get used to it. Owen's smile was small but real. Wouldn't dream of it. The clock on the wall ticked toward 2 a.m. The deadline loomed closer now. Less than 30 hours left before Arden's filing window opened, but something had shifted in the room. The tension that once came from hierarchy now hummed with shared purpose. They weren't CEO and janitor anymore. They were allies. Alara rubbed her temples and said, "When this is over, the world's going to ask who you are. What do you want me to tell them?" He thought for a moment. "Tell them I was the guy who cleaned up a mess again." She smiled. "You might want to work on your branding. Humility's cheaper." They both laughed softly, not because anything was funny, but because laughter had finally become possible. The monitors blinked with new data. Another shadow transaction appeared on the screen, tagged with Julian's marker. Proof, in numbers. Alara looked at Owen. "We're close." He nodded. "Close enough to finish this." And in that moment, surrounded by silence, fatigue, and mutual respect born from bruises neither could see, the balance finally evened out. For the first time since the gala, they weren't two people divided by rank or resentment. They were simply two survivors, standing on opposite sides of the same truth, ready to fight for it together. By dawn, the trap was set. Vance Corp's internal systems hummed like a staged symphony, quiet, deliberate, too smooth to be accidental. The fake acquisition file, the bait that would feed Arden's hunger, had already been sent through the corrupted channel. Now, all that remained was to wait for greed to do the rest. Owen sat before 3 glowing monitors in the dim analytics suite, coffee long cold, watching digital waves of market movement roll in microseconds at a time. Alara leaned against the glass wall behind him, arms folded, every inch the CEO, except her eyes which betrayed the fatigue of 3 sleepless nights. "Talk to me," she said. Owen zoomed in on a feed of high-frequency trades. "They've taken the bait. Look here, Arden's shell accounts just made their first move. They're shorting your logistics division based on the K-Bridge rumor." Alara straightened. "They believe we're going bankrupt." "They're betting you will," Owen corrected. "The fake merger memo convinced them your liquidity is about to collapse. They'll dump shares, push the market perception, and then swoop in when prices crash." Her lips tightened. "Exactly what they did to my father's company before his stroke." He nodded grimly. "Only this time, we wrote the story." By noon, the illusion had spread beyond control just as planned. Financial media outlets began reporting unconfirmed leaks about Vance Corp's aggressive merger strategy and potential liquidity strain. Anonymous insiders, the mole likely Julian, had seeded the story to journalist Arden owned through quiet investments. Social media ignited. Hashtags predicting Vance Corp's collapse trended within an hour. Stock tickers flashed red, market confidence trembled. Inside the command room, Alara's phone vibrated constantly. Board members, investors, regulators, everyone demanding clarity she couldn't yet give. She ignored them all, her eyes locked on Owen's real-time dashboards. "It's working," he said. "Just watch. Arden's fund managers are pulling back capital to cover their shorts. That means they're overcommitted." Alara exhaled, tension breaking just slightly. "If they're covering positions now, they're bleeding money." "Exactly," Owen said. "For every point your stock drops, their exposure doubles. Once we reverse the signal, once you announce stability, they'll collapse under their own panic." He turned in his chair, a rare spark of satisfaction flickering in his tired expression. "You're about to bankrupt the predator." Alara stared at the numbers, watching decades of manipulation unravel in her favor. "Good," she said quietly. "Let them feel what we felt." By 2 p.m. the market was chaos. Vance Corp's valuation dropped to 9% in 4 hours. But the analysts who mattered, the ones who understood nuance, began whispering that something didn't add up. The numbers were too clean, the leak too specific. And then, like the calm eye of a storm, a reversal began. The same outlets that had predicted collapse suddenly cited sources close to the board, claiming the K-Bridge deal was a smokescreen for a massive buyback strategy. Vance Corp shares began climbing again, first cautiously, then violently. Owen smirked. "Reversals kicking in. Investors are scrambling. They think you outsmarted the market." Alara allowed herself the smallest grin. "Maybe I did." Her phone rang again, the CFO's number flashing across the screen. She let it ring. "He's probably choking on his own panic right now," she said. "Let him sweat." Owen didn't answer. He was focused on the feeds, tracking how the fake data rippled through the system like a virus cured by its own mutation. For the first time, he felt the pulse of victory, numbers bending toward justice. At 5 p.m., the trading day closed. Vance Corp's stock rebounded to almost its original position. Arden's short positions were exposed, forcing emergency sell-offs across their portfolio. Their losses, within hours, exceeded $600 million. The board erupted with congratulatory emails. Shareholders flooded Alara's inbox with praise for her strategic brilliance. She didn't respond. She stood by the window, the city bathed in gold and smoke, her reflection staring back at her. For once her empire looked stable again. Owen joined her quietly. It worked. The market believes you again. For now, she said, her tone cautious. He frowned. You sound disappointed. I've learned that victories come with invoices, she said. We just don't know what this one costs yet. 2 hours later, Owen found it, the first hairline crack in their triumph. He had been tracing Ardent's fund reversals when he noticed something odd, a small recurring transaction pattern, hidden inside the mass of short covering trades. Come here, he said, voice low. Alara joined him. The pattern glowed faintly in the data feed, a rhythmic pulse buried under noise. What is that? She asked. It's not trading behavior, he said slowly. It's code. He pulled up the hexadecimal string embedded in the transaction metadata. It looked like gibberish, but the structure was deliberate. Every fourth character spelled out a sequence he recognized immediately. Clause. Alara's brow furrowed. That's from the Sybaris contract. He nodded. It's the same clause framework Ardent used in their last acquisition war. They've automated it into the trades. Her voice sharpened. Meaning this wasn't just a shorting scheme, he said. They built a secondary trigger inside the transactions, a contractual handshake. Every time one of their proxy firms executes a trade against you, a parallel legal claim gets filed under dormant merger clauses. In plain English, Owen? He looked up at her. They're building legal ownership while losing financial control. If this continues for 24 hours, their contracts might show Ardent holding temporary controlling interest in Vance Corp's subsidiaries. On paper, you'd look like the one violating trade restrictions. Alara's eyes went wide. They're using our fake collapse as camouflage to plant real control. He nodded grimly. They turned the smoke into a mirror. Within the hour, the celebration turned to crisis. Every data terminal in the analytics suite lit with warnings. Automated notices, legal filings, digital verifications, all triggered simultaneously through shell corporations and blind trusts. Ardent wasn't retreating. It was repositioning. Alara slammed her palm against the desk. How is this even possible? We built those clauses years ago. They used them, Owen said, already typing furiously. Clause 19b was written to protect against hostile acquisitions. If you appear unstable, the clause activates an automatic creditor review. Ardent exploited that. The review becomes an ownership test. They made you sign your own Trojan horse. Her face paled. So even though we faked the merger, the system thinks it's real. He nodded. And it's closing in. By midnight, their so-called victory had transformed into a ticking clock. Alara's legal team couldn't shut down the automated filings fast enough. Each cancellation triggered 2 new verifications. The entire mechanism was self-replicating. An algorithm disguised as a contract. Owen finally stepped back, his voice low but steady. We're not fighting investors anymore. We're fighting code. Alara sank into a chair, exhausted. Then we're doomed. No, he said, turning to face her. We just need to understand what it's built on. Her eyes lifted, searching his. You know this architecture? He hesitated. Yes, because it's built on mine. She blinked. Yours. The predictive protocol they're using. I recognize the pattern. It's my old volatility model. The one that got me fired. The one Landon Voss stole and sold to Ardent years ago. Alara stared at him, stunned. You built the system that's destroying us. He met her gaze, guilt burning behind his calm. I built it to prevent market crashes, not cause them, but they weaponized it. That's why I stayed invisible, because every time I tried to expose it, they buried me deeper. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally Alara said, Then you're the only one who can stop it. He shook his head. Not alone. They've hidden the failsafes inside your corporate chain. I'd need root authorization across your top 5 divisions. Done, she said immediately. He looked at her. Really looked as if measuring the weight of her trust. You realize that gives me access to everything. Accounts, patents, internal servers. The kind of access people kill to have. She didn't flinch. Then consider it a gamble. You saved me once. Now you save the company. He hesitated, then entered the credentials she sent to his console. The screen blinked, unlocking layers of encrypted data, cascading open like the gates of a vault. He whispered, "This isn't just a counterattack anymore, it's a war for truth." Alara stood behind him watching the light from the monitors reflect off her face. The CEO, the daughter, the survivor, all in one frame. "Then let's end it," she said. And as the room filled with the glow of unfolding code, part weapon, part confession, the illusion of victory shattered completely. The fake collapse had worked, but beneath it a deeper, older war had just awakened, one written in the same numbers that built their fortune. Morning came like a blade. The air in the tower was thin, electric, every monitor alive with red alerts and legal notifications. Alara Vance had spent the night building a wall of defense with Owen's code, thinking they were gaining ground. But by sunrise the world had changed again. Her phone buzzed. 15 missed calls, 3 emergency board meetings, and a new headline flooding every financial network. Vance Corp CEO, under investigation for insider fraud. Alara stared at the words, her throat tightening. The photo beneath it showed her face frozen mid-speech, cropped from last year's gala. Beside it a caption, "Confidential data leaks tied to CEO's private account." She didn't even look up when Owen entered, laptop under his arm. "Tell me this isn't real." He dropped the device onto the table, opening the feed of logs. "It's real," he said quietly, "but it's not yours." "What do you mean?" "Someone cloned your credentials. The fraud filings trace back to a login using your CEO key timestamped 4:02 a.m. UTC. But you were offline. It's a ghost signature." Her chest tightened. "So they're framing me." Owen nodded. "Perfectly. And whoever did it had access to our decoy architecture. They used the same internal route we created for Arden's trap." Her voice shook. "So one of us gave them the map." 2 hours later the board convened an emergency call. Julian sat at the far end of the table, feigning shock as he read through the headlines. "Alara, we need transparency. If there's even a chance these accusations are valid." "They're not," she snapped. He raised his hands, placating. "Then prove it. Until then, compliance is freezing your executive privileges. You'll step aside temporarily while the investigation proceeds." "You're behind this," she said, voice low, trembling with contained fury. "Aren't you?" Julian smiled faintly. "I'm behind the company, Alara. Someone has to be." The call ended in chaos. The board's silence was worse than accusation. The moment she hung up, she turned to Owen. "They'll destroy everything," she said. "The market already believes it. Once the regulators step in, they'll suspend trading. It's over." Owen was already typing. "Not yet." For 3 straight hours, he tore through the company's network, tracing packet after packet, comparing signature hashes. What he found was worse than sabotage. It was betrayal by familiarity. "Someone leaked our counter-traps architecture," he said. "They gave Arden the full framework of our decoy plan. The fake merger, the embedded markers, everything." Alara leaned against the wall, pale. "That information was on exactly 2 terminals. Mine and yours." "I didn't," he began but stopped when he saw her expression. She wasn't accusing. She was terrified. "If they've got your code, Owen, they'll find you." He froze. The words landed like thunder. For 6 years he had lived behind the name OK. Hale, the quiet janitor with no record. But now, the data trail they'd created to protect her had exposed him too. Alara looked at him, understanding dawning. "You've done this before, hiding behind an alias, cleaning up what others broke. Who are you really?" He met her gaze, torn between self-preservation and loyalty. Then he sighed. "My name isn't Owen Hale, it's Nathan Rourke, former lead analyst at Orion Capital, the firm that Ardent bought 6 years ago after framing me for the same crime they're using on you." Alara's lips parted. "The whistleblower case, you vanished." "I didn't vanish," he said bitterly. "They buried me. I exposed internal embezzlement, and their CEO, Landon Voss, forged the documents to make it look like I'd stolen the money. The same pattern we're seeing now, the same digital signature." Alara pressed a hand to her forehead. "You should have told me." "And what? That you hired a fugitive to clean your floors?" His tone softened. "You never would have listened to me then." She turned away, shaking. "You're right, I wouldn't have." Her assistant burst in without knocking. Karen, breathless, holding a tablet. "You need to see this." On the screen, a leaked email thread between Alara and Nathan Rourke, time-stamped 4:00 a.m. UTC, supposedly proof that she'd conspired with him to manipulate market data for personal profit. "It's fabricated," Alara said instantly. "They're using our encrypted memos." Owen interrupted, staring at the metadata. "No, they didn't fake it. They copied fragments of our real messages from the system and rearranged them. She went cold. That means they have root access. He nodded grimly. Julian. He's been copying our internal chats since day one. Then why would he release them now? Owen's expression hardened. Because Ardent doesn't want to just destroy your company. They want to destroy your credibility. Once the CEO looks corrupt, everything else collapses quietly. By late afternoon, Alara's official account was locked, her email access revoked, her ID badge deactivated, security protocols triggered as if she were an intruder in her own tower. Owen walked beside her through the empty executive floor. No one met her eyes. This is how it ends, she whispered. Like my father, dethroned by signatures. He stopped her. Not yet. Owen. Nathan. Whatever your name is, she said, voice cracking. They've made you part of this too. Once they connect your alias to me, they'll destroy you over again. He smiled faintly. Then we make sure they can't. How? By proving what they didn't expect. That the signature they're using isn't yours or mine. He opened his laptop again, hands moving fast. Every system logs not just who signs in but how they do. Timing, rhythm, micro delays between keystrokes. Think of it like a fingerprint made of hesitation. You type fast, deliberate, no wasted motion. Julian's are lazy, fluid, but the forged logins at 4:02 a.m. They're mechanical, perfectly timed, down to the millisecond. Alara leaned closer, meaning it was automated. Exactly. A bot, he said. The same kind used in algorithmic trading. He spun the laptop toward her, the data glowing in columns of green. And there's only one firm in the city that uses this pattern. She read the name aloud, trembling. Ardent Dynamics. He nodded. They didn't just frame you, they tried to resurrect me. Look, he highlighted another section of code. They used my old Orion credentials to plant the first falsified transfer. That's how they tied you to me. Her voice cracked. They've made you the evidence. He nodded grimly. And that's why I have to expose myself. Alara grabbed his arm. You can't. If you go public, I'll be hunted again. I know. Then why?
He met her eyes.
Because you're not the one who deserves to fall for this. I built the system that allows monsters like them to win. It's time I burn it down myself. Minutes later, Nathan walked into the central server core, the restricted floor where every byte of Vance Corp's digital identity lived. He connected his laptop directly into the main terminal, overriding the access logs. Alara followed, heart pounding. What are you doing? Resetting the narrative, he said. If I authenticate the code under my true name, the entire chain of forged signatures collapses. The fraud points back to Ardent's server, not yours. She shook her head. But that means the system will recognize you as the original author. They'll know you're alive. He smiled faintly. Good. Maybe this time they'll listen before they bury me again. Her throat tightened. You'll lose everything. I already did, he said. You still have something left to save. He pressed enter. The screens flared, data cascading in streams of light, authentication logs rewriting themselves, false signatures dissolving line by line. Across the city, regulators' dashboards updated in real time. The fraud chain snapped. The name Nathan Rourke reappeared in the global database for the first time in 6 years, attached not to guilt, but to vindication. Owen exhaled, a slow, shuddering breath. It's done. Alara stared at the monitor. You just traded your anonymity for my freedom. He looked at her, calm, unafraid. Some debts can't be paid in secret. The alarms outside began to blare. Security, media, the first shockwaves of a revelation too large to contain. Alara turned to him, eyes bright with something between gratitude and fear. Then let's make sure your story doesn't end the same way mine almost did. He nodded once. Together. And as the tower's systems roared back to life, the janitor who had once been invisible stepped out of the shadows for the last time, not as a ghost, but as the one man willing to burn his name so the truth could live. The world woke up to chaos. By sunrise, every financial network, every newsroom, every market terminal was lit with a single headline that no one could quite believe. Whistleblower returns from the dead. Leak exposes Ardent and Vance Corp collusion. In the center of the storm stood Nathan Rourke, the man the industry had buried, now alive in the light he'd once fled from. It began at 3:47 a.m., in a dim side office of Vance Corp's analytics division. Nathan typed the final command that uploaded his archive. 6 years of suppressed evidence, encrypted correspondence, and forged financial audits, linking both corporations in a cycle of mutual exploitation. He attached a personal statement, not polished, not rehearsed, but raw. My name is Nathan Rourke. I was framed for exposing the system that allowed Ardent and its subsidiaries to manipulate public markets through predictive modeling. I was silenced, erased, and buried under their data. I am done hiding. This is the truth they built their empires on. Let it be seen. He hit send. Within minutes, the files replicated across dozens of mirror sites. An automated cascade triggered through public transparency servers and whistleblower networks. Once live, it couldn't be pulled down. The story was no longer his to control. It was public domain. Alara found him standing by the panoramic window of her office, the city's skyline flickering with morning light. He looked calm, but there was something hollow behind his eyes. You did it, she said quietly. It had to be done, he replied. She stepped closer. You just handed them your life, Nathan. Every court, every regulator, every journalist will come for you now. He turned to face her. They already had it. At least now it means something. Alara's expression softened, pride and heartbreak colliding. You should have let me take part of the fall. He shook his head. You already did. You stood by me when no one else would. That's more than anyone's ever done. By mid-morning, the financial world split open. News anchors read excerpts from Nathan's archive in disbelief, internal memos from Ardent's executives detailing the misuse of predictive algorithms, emails showing Julian cross-forwarding confidential data to offshore accounts, legal documents proving Ardent's manipulation of Clause 19b, signed and time-stamped. But what shocked everyone most was the inclusion of Vance Corp's complicity. Not Alara's, but her father's. The late Marcus Vance had brokered covert data-sharing agreements with Ardent years ago, allowing their predictive algorithms to profit from artificial market fluctuations. Nathan hadn't spared the dead. At first, Alara's heart sank. You leaked everything. He nodded. If I only released half, they'd spin it as revenge. The truth doesn't survive half clean. It has to burn through everything. Her jaw tightened. You torched my father's name. I freed you from it. The words landed hard, but they were true. For years, her fear of repeating his mistakes had chained her judgment. Now the truth had leveled the playing field. She looked at him for a long time, then said quietly, "Then we rebuild from ashes." By noon, the consequences began. Ardent's stock plunged 30% within hours. The Securities Commission froze its accounts. Interpol issued warrants for Landon Voss, Ardent's CEO, and several of his top executives. At Vance Corp, trading halted under mandatory investigation. Regulators descended on the tower, demanding files, statements, and full cooperation. The board convened an emergency hearing, this time not to depose Alara, but to interrogate the entire system her father had built. The room was packed when she walked in beside Nathan. Cameras lined the back wall. Journalists whispered like vultures circling. Chairman Devereaux, her father's oldest ally, began the session. Miss Vance, your company is under federal investigation for breach of fiduciary duty and illegal data manipulation. Do you admit that your father authorized such agreements? The Zalara stood tall. I admit that the man who built this company was not the man I believed him to be. But I also admit that he taught me one thing worth keeping. That truth, no matter how painful, is the only foundation strong enough to rebuild from. The room murmured. She continued, Nathan Rourke exposed that truth. At great personal cost. He's not my scapegoat. He's my partner in setting this right. Devereaux sneered. Your partner is a fugitive who just admitted to cybercrime. Nathan rose, voice calm but resonant. If truth is a crime, then your entire industry is a prison. Every camera captured it, a single defiant sentence echoing across the room like a verdict. The investigation widened. Over the next 48 hours, forensic teams traced the fake fraud filings directly to Ardent's off-site servers, confirming that the ghost signature framing Alara had originated from Julian's device under remote control. Julian was arrested 2 days later, attempting to flee the country with a forged diplomatic ID. When confronted, he confessed that Landon Voss had promised him a board seat in Ardent's new conglomerate, if he could deliver Alara's head. Landon didn't make it that far. Interpol caught him at Zurich airport, handcuffed between two silent agents. His company imploded overnight. Meanwhile, Nathan faced his own reckoning. The same truth that freed Alara now exposed his unauthorized access, false identity, and years of concealed data work. The commission subpoenaed him to testify before the Federal Securities Tribunal. Alara refused to let him go alone. The courtroom was sterile, almost cold in its indifference. Rows of reporters filled the back. The tribunal chair, an austere woman named Magistrate Harrow, adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Rourke," she began, "you admit to leaking proprietary data from both corporations." "Yes." "You also admit to identity fraud, unauthorized network access, and data interference."
"Yes."
"And you believe this absolves you of guilt?" "No," he said, "but it absolves the truth." A ripple went through the gallery. Harrow tilted her head. "Why now, Mr. Rourke? After 6 years in hiding?" He glanced at Alara, who sat beside him, her expression unreadable. Then he said, "Because someone finally listened." Outside, the world was watching. Public sentiment had shifted. Nathan's leak had ignited a moral reckoning, not just for Ardent or Vance Corp, but for every corporation that had turned data into weaponry. Commentators called him the ghost who rewrote the market. Others called him a criminal. But to the people who had lost pensions, homes, and savings in manipulated crashes, he was a savior. Thousands gathered outside the tribunal, holding signs that read, "Truth has a name and we see you now." Inside, the questioning continued. "Miss Vance," Magistrate Harrow said, turning to Alara, "you've built your reputation on restoring public trust. Do you still stand by this man?" Alara rose from her seat, hands steady. "Yes. Without him, I'd still be running from ghosts I didn't know existed. He exposed the system that corrupted my father, my company, and me. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty too." Harrow studied her, then said, "You realize aligning with him may cost you your reinstatement?" Alara nodded. "Then I'll build something new, clean this time. Maybe that's the only legacy worth having." The tribunal recessed for deliberation. Outside, the city thundered with rain and media drones. In the quiet antechamber, Alara turned to Nathan. "You're going to take the full hit for this, aren't you?" He smiled faintly. "Someone has to sign the confession. You don't have to be the martyr." "I'm not. You'll rebuild. That's enough." She shook her head. "No, it's not. You didn't do this for revenge. You did it to make the truth visible. So let's finish it that way." She pulled out her tablet, opened a new live feed, and placed it between them. One last statement. Together. The stream went live within seconds. Millions tuned in. Alara began. 6 years ago, my company participated in systems that profited from manipulation. I didn't know the full extent, but ignorance doesn't erase damage. We took part in a lie that hurt thousands. Nathan spoke next. "I built the tool that made that lie possible, and when I tried to expose it, I was buried. But silence is complicity. So this time we're telling it all." Their words weren't rehearsed. They didn't need to be. Truth had found its own rhythm. "We can't undo what's been done," Alara said, "but we can show you how it happened and how we'll rebuild without deception." Nathan added, "The systems we trusted failed because they were designed for control, not transparency. We're going to publish the framework that proves it. Open source, public, permanent." She nodded. "If corporations are built on secrets, let this be the first built on truth." The video spread faster than any press release. Within hours, the markets steadied, not because investors trusted the companies, but because for the first time in years they trusted the people speaking. 3 weeks later, the tribunal delivered its verdict. Landon Voss and Julian Cross were sentenced for corporate espionage and fraud. Nathan Rourke was granted partial immunity under whistleblower protection laws. Alara Vance was reinstated as CEO under strict compliance oversight, her company now under full restructuring. When the ruling was read, she turned to Nathan. "You're free." He shook his head. "Not really, but it's enough." Months passed. The storm calmed. The headlines faded, but something deeper remained. One evening, Nathan stood again in the tower he once mopped, staring at the skyline, now reflected in a glass that had been cleaned, not polished to deceive. Alara joined him, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "I read your statement again," she said, "the one you sent with the leak." He smiled faintly. "Still think it was too reckless?" "No," she said softly. "I think it was the first honest thing this city has heard in years." They stood in silence, watching the lights blink across the river. She finally asked, "What will you do now?" He thought for a moment. "Start small, help rebuild systems that can't lie. Maybe write again. Teach, if anyone will listen." "They will," she said. "People listen to ghosts who come back." He chuckled. "And you?" Alara looked out the window. The city reflected in her eyes. "Clean the mess my father left behind, and maybe keep a janitor's eye on the truth." Nathan smiled. "Good habit." She extended her hand. "Partners?" He took it. "Always." As the city lights glowed below, the world they'd rebuilt stood fragile but alive, no longer divided by hierarchy, no longer fueled by illusion. Two names once buried beneath greed had become something else entirely.
A warning!
A promise. And for the first time, a shared beginning built not on power but on truth. 6 months later, the tower didn't hum the way it used to. Gone were the midnight trading alerts, the red tickers, the constant low murmur of fear that used to vibrate through the marble floors. Vance Corp was quieter now, not smaller, not weaker, just cleaner. The name on the glass still read Vance Corp, but beneath it in smaller print, a new line had been added. Ethics First Initiative, built on accountability. It was Alara's doing. Her first act after reinstatement had been to dissolve the old board entirely. Every executive now signed an open declaration that all financial activities were subject to independent audit, made public every quarter. She'd invited regulators into the system her father once tried to seal off. Transparency had become both shield and compass. In the heart of it all sat Nathan Rourke. Not behind a mop, not behind a console, but at the same conference table where he once wasn't allowed to stand. Alara had offered him the role of Chief Integrity Officer, an executive position created specifically for him. He'd accepted with one condition. He still carried his old janitor's badge. It hung from his pocket every day, the faded "Oh Hail" still legible. The new employees whispered about it sometimes, how the man who rewired the company's soul still wore the ID of its lowest rank. But those who worked closely with him understood. It wasn't nostalgia. It was a compass. "I keep it," he'd once said, "so I remember that the floor you clean is just as real as the chair you sit on." On the top floor, Alara's office looked different now. The glass table replaced with oak, the portraits of past CEOs removed. In their place hung a single framed phrase written in black ink, the handwriting unmistakably hers. "Power means nothing without conscience." Nathan entered, holding a thin folder. "The ethics audit report," he said. "Independent review came back clean. No irregularities this quarter." Alara smiled faintly. "That's the third one in a row." He nodded. "We're starting to look boring." "It's beautiful." She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that hadn't existed in the old tower. "Never thought I'd be proud of dull." He placed the report on her desk. "Your new sustainability fund launched yet?" "Yesterday," she said. "We're investing in recovery projects, scholarships for whistleblowers, research grants for corporate ethics. It's strange, using the same money that once bought silence to fund truth." "That's called balance," Nathan said. She watched him for a moment. The quiet steadiness, the patience he carried even when the world had burned around him. "You know," she said, "the board's still asking why you refuse a new badge. It's starting to bother them." He smiled. "Good. They should stay bothered." "Why?" "Because if the people at the top get too comfortable, someone below will always pay for it. I've seen it too many times." Alara nodded slowly. "You've changed this place more than I ever could." "No," he said. "You changed it, I just reminded it what honesty sounds like." Outside her window, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm. Glass towers glittering like old promises, traffic crawling, people moving in the half-hope that progress meant peace. But inside this single building, something different had begun to take root. A culture of pause. Every decision now went through a simple test Nathan had created. The floor test. Before approving any policy, Alara required her team to ask one question. Would this still feel fair if you were the janitor who had to live under it? No lawyer could game that. No algorithm could twist it. It was human, and that was its strength. Later that evening, they walked through the refurbished lobby together. The marble floors gleamed. The air smelled of new paint. But the humility lingered. Nathan stopped by the corner where his old cleaning cart used to stand. "They left the outlet," he said, smiling faintly. Alara looked at the spot. "You want it removed?" He shook his head. "No. It reminds me that this place doesn't erase what came before." She studied him. The same man who'd once been invisible now treated as the conscience of an empire. "You could lead this company, you know," she said quietly. He laughed. "And undo all the peace you just built?" "I'm serious." "So am I," he said. "Titles don't clean messes. People do. My job is to make sure we remember that." Alara nodded, eyes soft. "Then maybe that's the real promotion." Weeks passed. Investors returned, not because of profit margins, but because of stability. Transparency reports were now streamed live every quarter. Employees, from interns to directors, took part in open discussions on company policies. The hierarchy still existed, but it no longer dictated worth. In time, the industry began to shift. Other firms copied the Vance model, implementing ethics boards and real-time accountability frameworks. What began as scandal turned into blueprint, and at every conference when journalists asked Alara what changed her company, she always gave the same answer. A man who refused to climb, and still managed to lift us all. One evening, after a long meeting, Nathan stood on the rooftop terrace, the skyline flickering in golden haze. Alara joined him, handing over a coffee. "Do you ever miss anonymity?" she asked. He thought about it. "Sometimes, but hiding didn't make me free. Truth did." She smiled. "That sounds like something my father would have written on a press release." Then maybe he had the right words, just the wrong map. They stood in silence, wind brushing through the steel rails, the city whispering below. Lara looked at him and said softly, "You know, someday people will forget this story. The headlines, the hearings, the names. All of it." He nodded. "Good, that means it worked." She frowned slightly. "How so?" "Because the point of truth isn't to be remembered," he said. "It's to keep the world honest for a little longer." She smiled. "Then you've done your part." He glanced down at the old badge clipped to his belt, the edges worn smooth with time. The faded photo of OK Hale looked almost like a stranger now. "Not yet," he said, "but we're getting there." And for the first time, the tower didn't feel like a monument to power. It felt like a place of work. Real work. Work worth keeping clean. They say every empire rebuilds itself twice. Once on ambition, and once on humility. Vance Corp had learned the hard way that the second foundation lasts longer. The skyline still shimmered as it always did, but those inside the tower no longer measured success by the noise they made. The walls that once echoed with applause and anxiety now carried quieter sounds. Honest work, steady laughter. Conversations that ended with understanding instead of fear. In the middle of it all, Nathan Rourke still arrived early, still carried coffee in a chipped mug, still wore the same faded ID badge that read "Oh Hale." The younger employees often asked him why he never upgraded it. He'd smile and say, "Because it still opens every door that matters." People thought he meant the office doors. He didn't. The truth was simpler and deeper. The badge reminded him that intelligence doesn't belong to those with titles. It hides in quiet minds, in people who listen instead of shouting, in hands that fix problems no one else sees. The world often mistakes silence for weakness, but Nathan had learned that humility was just strength with its volume turned down. Alara often said he was the soul of the company now, but Nathan disagreed. He'd tell her the soul was always here, it just needed room to breathe. Every few months, they'd hold open floor meetings, not press conferences, not quarterly announcements, just honest dialogue streamed for the public. Employees could ask anything. Executives had the answer without scripts. It was messy, sometimes awkward, but always real. One evening, a junior analyst asked Nathan, "How do you stay grounded after everything you've done?" He paused for a moment, then said, "Because I've been on every floor of this building. I know what it feels like to be invisible. If you remember what it's like to be unseen, you'll never forget to see others." The room went quiet. That was his gift, not his intelligence, but his stillness. If there's a lesson in all this, it isn't about power or strategy or revenge. It's about perspective. The smartest voice in the room isn't always the loudest. The strongest person isn't the one who commands, it's the one who understands. And sometimes the person sweeping the floor sees the cracks before anyone else does. Maybe that's what real intelligence looks like. The courage to notice, even when no one's looking back. Before every broadcast, before every meeting, Alara still asked Nathan the same quiet question. "Do you think people will believe in us again?" And he'd give the same calm answer. "Belief isn't what we need. Consistency is." Because faith, he knew, doesn't return through headlines. It grows back slowly, through proof, through honesty, through small acts that never make the news. Final reflection from Nathan's closing address. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or made to feel like your place in the world is too small to matter, remember this: the world only measures what it can see, but the things that keep it standing are often invisible. Keep doing quiet work, keep asking honest questions, keep choosing integrity when no one's watching. One day the world will need your kind of strength, and when it does, you'll already be ready. If this story made you pause, even for a moment, tell us what part spoke to you. Do you believe humility is a weakness, or the beginning of real strength? Share your thoughts below, and let's keep this conversation alive about power, purpose, and the kind of intelligence that doesn't need to shout to be heard.